War, conquest, propaganda, espionage, and theft. Those are not the things you expect to find when you open a map on your phone. But for most of human history, maps were never just tools for finding the fastest road home. They helped kings collect taxes, merchants control oceans, generals move armies, and empires claim lands they had never seen. A single line drawn across the Atlantic once divided much of the unknown world between two European powers. A distorted projection made some countries appear far larger than they really are. Islands that never existed remained on official charts for centuries, sending sailors into empty seas. Even today, the border shown on a digital map can change depending on which country you open it from. We trust maps because they look precise. They use coordinates, measurements, symbols, and clean lines. But every map leaves something out. Every map chooses what belongs at the center, what appears at the edge, which names survive, and where one nation ends and another begins. Maps do not simply describe the world. They shape the world people believe exists. But this story does not begin with satellites, explorers, or empires. It begins with one frightened human trying to answer a simple question: where am I now? Long before maps had borders, coordinates, or north at the top, humans were already trying to preserve knowledge of place. The earliest maps were not always drawn on paper. They were carved into stone, scratched onto bone, woven into stories, and carried inside memory. At first, a map existed for one reason: to help someone find the way home. Some of the most remarkable examples came from the Marshall Islands. Navigators there built charts from thin sticks and shells. The sticks did not represent coastlines in the modern sense. They showed the movement of ocean swells, the way waves bent around islands, and hidden patterns of sea. Shells marked land, but the real map was the knowledge required to read it. Polynesian navigators could cross vast stretches of the Pacific without compasses or paper charts. Far from land, a navigator might study where a star rose above the horizon, watch the flight of a seabird, or lie against the canoe and feel the direction of the swells through its wooden hull. Changes in cloud shape, water color, and wave rhythm could reveal islands still hidden beyond the horizon. Their maps were not flat images. They were living systems of observation, memorized and passed from one generation to the next. Elsewhere, ancient Babylonians pressed visions of the world into clay, placing their cities near the center and surrounding known lands with a ring of water. These maps were not perfectly accurate. They were something more important. They showed what a culture believed mattered, what it feared, and how far its world extended. But once rulers began taxing land, building roads, and controlling cities, maps changed. They became records of power. Once cities expanded and rulers controlled farmland, maps stopped being guides to survival. They became tools for measuring wealth. Governments needed to know where fields began, where canals should run, which roads connected settlements, and how much tax each farmer owed. A boundary scratched onto clay could determine which family owned a field, who could reach a canal, who harvested the crop, and who owed part of that harvest to the state. Mapping land meant turning space into property. One example is the Turin Papyrus map, created in ancient Egypt 3,000 years ago. It shows a desert route through Wadi Hammamat, where expeditions searched for stone and minerals. Different colors mark types of rock. Mountains, roads, quarries, and mining areas appear not as symbols of myth, but as practical information for a royal mission. This was more than a picture of terrain. It was a plan for extracting resources. Across the ancient world, maps helped rulers organize irrigation, divide farmland, build roads, move soldiers, and control territory. The more accurately land could be measured, the more efficiently it could be taxed, exploited, or defended. The moment humans learned to map land, they also learned to divide it, price it, and fight over it. But mapping kingdoms was one thing. Mapping the entire Earth required imagining its true shape. To map the Earth, ancient scholars first had to answer a question no traveler could solve by walking. How large was the planet itself? More than 2,000 years ago, the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes found an answer using almost nothing. He had heard that at noon on the summer solstice, sunlight reached the bottom of a deep well in Syene, meaning the sun stood almost directly overhead. At the same moment in Alexandria, hundreds of kilometers north, a vertical column cast a shadow. Eratosthenes measured the angle of that shadow. Then he estimated the distance between the two cities. If Earth was curved, he reasoned, the difference in sunlight revealed a fraction of the planet's full circle. With a well, a column, and geometry, he calculated the circumference of Earth with astonishing accuracy. That achievement changed mapping forever. The world was no longer an endless surface of roads and coastlines. It was a measurable sphere. Centuries later, Claudius Ptolemy developed a system that allowed mapmakers to place locations using latitude and longitude. His coordinate grid made it possible to describe places mathematically, even when the mapmaker had never visited them. But Ptolemy's work also contained errors. Distances were miscalculated. Asia appeared wider than it truly was. The oceans seemed smaller. Those mistakes would survive for centuries and influence explorers who trusted ancient authority more than uncertain evidence. And once an error entered the grid, it could look like scientific truth. A map could now represent the entire world. It could also spread a mistake farther than any traveler ever could. For centuries, maps were not designed to show the world as it physically appeared. They were designed to show what people believed the world meant. In medieval Europe, many maps placed Jerusalem at the center, with East at the top. Oceans, kingdoms, biblical events, and mythical creatures shared the same surface. The Garden of Eden could appear beside real cities. Monsters waited at the edges of the known world. To modern eyes, these maps seem inaccurate. But accuracy was not always their purpose. One of the most famous examples is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, created around the year 1300. It contains thousands of images and inscriptions, combining geography, religion, history, and legend into a single vision of creation. It was less a navigation tool than a visual encyclopedia of how the world was understood. Every culture placed its own values at the center. Chinese maps often emphasized the imperial realm. Islamic mapmakers sometimes oriented the world differently. North was not naturally up. That was a choice. A map could organize space, but it could also organize belief. And while monks were drawing worlds shaped by faith, sailors and merchants faced a less symbolic problem. For sailors, an inaccurate coastline was not a philosophical problem. It could be fatal. As Mediterranean trade expanded, practical navigation charts began replacing symbolic visions of the world. By the late Middle Ages, portolan charts began appearing in European ports. These maps showed coastlines, harbors, islands, and dangerous passages with remarkable detail. Lines radiating across their surfaces helped navigators follow consistent directions over open water. Some errors survived just as carefully as real discoveries. Phantom islands appeared on charts after sailors mistook clouds, icebergs, or distant coastlines for land. Once copied by respected mapmakers, these islands could remain for centuries. Ships were sent to find them. Expeditions searched empty stretches of ocean. The more often the mistake was reproduced, the more authoritative it appeared. On a map, even imaginary land could become a destination, but accurate geographic knowledge was valuable, and valuable knowledge was rarely shared freely. Portugal and Spain treated maps like state secrets. Returning captains were required to report new coastlines, currents, and islands so officials could update master charts. Access was restricted, copies were controlled. Stealing or reproducing one could be considered an act of espionage. A single map might reveal where ships could resupply, where reefs waited beneath the surface, or which route led fastest to spices, gold, and new territory. In an age when oceans separated wealth from disaster, a chart could be worth more than the cargo aboard a ship. And then one navigator sailed west, using a map of the world that was dangerously wrong. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west, believing Asia was much closer than it truly was. Contrary to the popular myth, educated Europeans did not think the Earth was flat. Columbus's mistake was more dangerous. He underestimated the planet's size and overestimated how far Asia extended eastward. On the maps and calculations he trusted, the ocean between Europe and Japan looked narrow enough to cross. It was not. When Columbus reached the Caribbean, he did not believe he had found an unknown continent. He forced the islands, people, and landscapes he encountered into the geography he expected to see. He called the local population Indians because, in his mind, he had reached the outer edge of Asia. The map in his head proved stronger than the evidence in front of him. That error helped trigger consequences far beyond navigation. European conquest, epidemic disease, forced labor, territorial seizure, and the destruction of indigenous societies followed across the Americas. One of the most influential voyages in history began with a map that made the world smaller than it really was. But once European powers understood that vast lands stood between them and Asia, the question changed. They no longer asked what the world looked like. They asked who had the right to divide it. In 1494, Spain and Portugal attempted something almost unimaginable. They divided the world with a line. The same kind of mark that once guided a traveler home could now assign continents to empires. After Columbus returned from the Caribbean, both kingdoms claimed the right to control newly reached lands. To prevent war, representatives negotiated the Treaty of Tordesillas. An invisible boundary was drawn through the Atlantic Ocean. Territory on one side would belong to Spain. Territory on the other would belong to Portugal. No one living in those lands was consulted. The line did not follow rivers, mountains, languages, or existing nations. It existed only on maps and in agreements between European rulers. Yet it helped shape centuries of conquest, colonization, and cultural change. Its most famous consequence can still be heard today. Brazil fell within Portugal's sphere, while much of the rest of South America came under Spanish control. That is why Portuguese became Brazil's dominant language, while Spanish spread across neighboring countries. A mark of ink created political realities that outlived the empires that drew it. But claiming land on paper was easy. Measuring it, governing it, taxing it, and extracting its wealth required maps far more detailed and far more powerful. Drawing a border on a map was only the beginning. To control vast territories, empires needed to measure them. Surveyors crossed mountains, forests, deserts, and villages carrying chains, compasses, and heavy instruments. They calculated distances, recorded rivers, marked roads, and divided land into sections that could be taxed, sold, defended, or exploited. One of the largest projects was the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India. Beginning in the 19th century, teams measured the subcontinent through enormous networks of triangles. Their work helped calculate the height of the world's highest mountains and produced maps of extraordinary precision. But this was not only a scientific achievement. The same information helped the British Empire move troops, collect revenue, build roads, control populations, and extract resources. Land that had once been understood through local memory and tradition was transformed into grids, numbers, and administrative zones. During the European partition of Africa, borders were often drawn across maps by officials who had never visited the land. The lines ignored languages, trade networks, kingdoms, migration routes, and relationships between neighboring communities. Some ran almost perfectly straight for hundreds of kilometers because they followed coordinates agreed upon in distant rooms rather than realities on the ground. From a distant office, the lines looked clean. In reality, they divided villages, families, trade routes, and entire cultures. Maps no longer followed empire. They made empire possible. By the 20th century, maps had become essential weapons of war. Generals used them to plan invasions, position artillery, move supplies, and select bombing targets. Soldiers carried detailed charts of trenches, roads, bridges, and elevation. A missing hill or incorrect river crossing could destroy an entire operation. During the Second World War, Allied planners created thousands of maps for the invasion of Normandy. They studied beaches, tides, defenses, villages, and even the strength of the soil beneath military vehicles. Maps did not simply show where the battle would happen. They helped determine how it would unfold. But decades before military planners used maps to target armies, a London doctor had used one to identify an invisible killer. In 1854, physician John Snow mapped deaths during a cholera outbreak in London. Each mark represented a victim. As the points accumulated, they formed a cluster around a public water pump on Broad Street. At a time when many believed disease spread through poisonous air, the map revealed a different pattern: contaminated water. By making invisible connections visible, Snow helped transform public health. A map could guide armies toward destruction. It could also guide a city toward the source of an epidemic. Every flat map tells the truth by distorting something else. The earth is round, but paper is not. To flatten a sphere, map makers must distort something: shape, distance, direction, or size. No projection can preserve them all. In 1569, Gerardus Mercator created a map designed for sailors. On his projection, lines of constant compass direction appeared straight, allowing navigators to plot courses across the ocean with remarkable ease. For navigation, it was brilliant. For comparing countries, it was deeply misleading. As the map stretched the curved Earth into a rectangle, regions near the poles expanded dramatically. Greenland appeared almost as large as Africa, even though Africa is more than 14 times bigger. Europe and North America looked enormous, while countries near the equator appeared smaller than they truly were. Mercator did not create his projection to rank civilizations or exaggerate political power. But over time, a specialized navigation tool became the default image of the world in classrooms, offices, and atlases. Generations grew up seeing distortion as reality. Every projection solves one problem by creating another. A world map can represent some properties accurately, but only by distorting others. For centuries, map makers decided which distortion everyone else would see. Then, photography, aircraft, and satellites gave them an entirely new way to look down at the Earth. By the late 20th century, maps escaped paper and moved into orbit. Satellites photographed coastlines, tracked storms, measured mountains, and recorded changes across the planet. Then GPS transformed mapping again. A network of satellites began broadcasting precise timing signals, allowing receivers on Earth to calculate their position within meters. The system was developed for military navigation, but it eventually entered civilian life. Technology designed to guide aircraft, ships, and missiles now helps people call a taxi, deliver food, find a hospital, or avoid traffic. Maps were no longer static images. They became live systems. Digital maps could update roads, respond to traffic, estimate arrival times, and remember where users had been. They did not simply show the world. They began shaping movement through it. The map had become more accurate, more useful, and more personal than ever before. But it had also begun collecting data about the people who trusted it, every hour of every day. Digital maps became more precise than any paper map before them. But precision did not make them neutral. A disputed border can appear as a solid line in one country, a dashed line in another, or disappear entirely, depending on where the user opens the app. Place names may change with language, local law, or political pressure. The same territory can be labeled in different ways for different audiences. The map has not escaped politics. It has made politics harder to see. Algorithms now decide which roads appear fastest, which businesses rank first, and which neighborhoods receive the most traffic. A routing update can redirect thousands of vehicles through a quiet street. A missing road can isolate an entire community. A place pushed down in search results can become almost invisible, even when it exists physically. These systems make decisions constantly, but their rules are rarely visible to the people following them. For most of history, kings, generals, and governments controlled the map. Today, that power increasingly belongs to technology companies, databases, and automated systems operating behind a screen. The line has moved from clay, parchment, and paper into code. So when billions of people rely on digital maps every day, one question becomes unavoidable. Who decides which border is correct, which name survives, and which version of the world we are allowed to see? Despite satellites, smartphones, and centuries of surveying, the world is still not fully mapped. Much of the ocean floor remains known only in rough detail. Beneath forests, LiDAR is revealing roads, temples, and cities hidden for centuries. After earthquakes and floods, volunteers study satellite images to mark damaged bridges, hospitals, and roads before rescue teams arrive. In places ignored by commercial maps, local communities are drawing themselves into existence. Imagine a village with no official road, no searchable clinic, and no name recognized by a navigation system. To the families living there, the place is real. But to an ambulance driver, a relief organization, or a government database, it may barely exist. The moment residents add its roads, homes, and water sources to a shared map, that invisibility begins to disappear. Indigenous groups map ancestral land to defend it from mining, logging, and illegal occupation. Residents add paths, clinics, wells, and villages that governments or technology companies have overlooked. A road added to a map can help an ambulance find a patient, a relief truck reach a village, or a community prove that it exists. For most of history, maps were created by rulers, armies, and empires looking down from above. Now, ordinary people can help build them from the ground up. The map is no longer only a tool for claiming territory. It can also protect communities, reveal destruction, and make invisible people visible. After thousands of years, humanity is still drawing the world. And perhaps the map will never truly be finished. Every time you open a map, you are looking at thousands of years of human ambition compressed into a single image. A Polynesian navigator once read the direction of waves. Eratosthenes measured the earth with a shadow. Sailors guarded charts as state secrets. Empires drew borders across lands they had never seen. Doctors mapped disease. Generals mapped targets. Satellites now calculate your position in seconds. The blue dot on your screen feels precise, but the map around it is still built from choices. Someone decided which road deserved a name, which border should appear, what belonged at the center, and which places would remain invisible. Maps have guided humans across oceans, toward the source of epidemics, and into places hidden for centuries. They have also guided armies, divided communities, and transformed imaginary lines into physical power. A map is never simply the world. It is an argument about the world, created by someone for a purpose. The blue dot tells you where you are. History tells you who decided what everything around you should look like.